Hello.
Welcome to our annual Ask a GM DM panel, and uh, my name is Don Kaiser. I'm the chair of ConFABulous and Galexicon when it's in town. I'll just do a little introduction, and I'll have Chris give him an introduction. I've been doing games, playing D&D since 1976. So Chris is just laughing. It's been a long time, Chris. Yes, yeah, I've been doing GMing D&D since around that time. Not much long afterwards. Currently, I GM a Tech Email game on Sunday nights. And I am GMing two D&D games, one for some coworkers and their kids. Right now we're playing Prince of the Apocalypse, but we're going to very soon switch over to Curse of Strahd. And then with my nephew and grandnephew and their friends, and we're doing the Ghost of Saltmarsh D&D adventure. So that's the ones I'm currently GMing, but I have GM'd lots of things: D&D, Techumel, chill. So, Chris.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Severin. I have been dungeon mastering or game mastering since about, I want to say the 2000s, maybe 1999, 1998. That's when I first started. Most of my experience is with Dungeons and Dragons. I have run some White Wolf World of Darkness games in the past. I'm currently running, well, I'm on hiatus for running right now. But I have two D&D campaigns that I run and one Monster of the Week that started out as a Buffy game that I run.
So, but you're currently not running, on hiatus, you say?
Correct. Currently on hiatus due to not going digital with all the games, and I'm also currently moving, so I just don't really have time.
Okay. Yeah, I of course, all my games, went virtual, although I use, well, Chris, when you went virtual, what technology were you using?
We used a mix. I've done Roll20, but then we switched over to a site called Fantasy Grounds, and someone else has an account with them, so they are running currently.
Okay. Yeah, I did Roll20 very briefly. A friend of mine, Chad Weber, was running, and then my Wednesday group, which is I'm not running, although I have run some things with them in the past. We switched over to Fantasy Grounds, and so I'm running Fantasy Grounds Classic for the groups that I run. My Tech Email group, of course, we're doing that because it's got the really good generic RPG, because of course Tech Email doesn't have any character sheets or anything like that, so we had to create all our own character sheets in Fantasy Grounds, and it's got a good a pretty good thing for that. And then my other two groups, the Ghost of Saltmarsh and the Prince of Apocalypse, soon to be Curse of Strahd, are running the classic as well. But my Wednesday group are running the beta version of the Unity Fantasy Grounds. So Chris, do you have anything anything that you want to, any starting out tips, tricks, things like that you want to share?
Sure. So with any type of gaming system, there are basically kind of three pillars to any game, and that's socialization within the game. So like talking to NPCs, socializing within the characters, the playable characters. There's the combat, so whatever type of combat that occurs in game. And then there's exploration. Those are kind of the three main pillars. And then it's kind of basically finding a group that will balance all of those uh, in a good way. And also, I guess maybe depending on your group type, you just focus on one more than others. Like some people just want to do hack and slash and they're not interested in role play. So then, if that's the kind of game you want to run, then that's certainly fine. I think it's once you get once you do it enough, you kind of learn to know what kind of expectations that you want to meet or provide. And you're able to ask those questions of your player characters to be like, what kind of game do you want to play? Do you want to just go through and kill monsters, or do you want mystery and political intrigue? You know, what kind of things interest you as a character player, or you know, something that they think that they would like to see in their game.
My TechML group, until very recently, well, until very recently, was pretty much all role playing, because the TechML is, it's such an amazing world, and I prefer to have people really explore the world, rather than doing a lot of combat. And we've done all kinds of crazy things. They went to earlier last year, they spent some time at the ancient planetary governor's home, from before the fall. And right now they are exploring, they have, as a group, my group purchased an old castle, and they're rehabilitating it. And they found out that there's a very large underworld, kind of a mega dungeon underneath it. That's it's got, that I've created a very interesting story about. It's not just a big dungeon, but there's actually some crazy, interesting things that have gone on down there, and how it was created. They came across a tapestry that kind of showed why it was created, why the underworld was created, and things like that. And so they're been exploring that. And then one of the things that they found down there was a map showing some of the interesting mineralogical deposits in the lands surrounding the castle. So they've been out there looking at crystals and things like that lately, caves and things like that. And there's been a little more combat, since they're outside in the wilderness, and spelunking and things like that. So there's that. And then it's been kind of an eye-opening experience for me, because most of the time, again, I've been playing for a very long time, as I said, and it's usually been with people, relatively near my age, and of course that has changed over the years, what my age is, but most of the my TechML group are all adults, and my Wednesday night group's all adults, but my coworker group is mixed adults and youth, 14, 15, 16. And my group for my my nephew and my grandnephew and their friends, again, 12, 13, 14, and it's been kind of an eye-opening experience running for 12 and 13-year-olds. It's different. It's very, very different. As I say, my nephew and the people in the group that are his age have gotten into it, and they're kind of similar players, understand the thing. But my grandnephews they want to go out and kill things.
Yep. So we got a question that's similar to that. So what's the difference between hack and slash and role playing, and how do you approach the storylines of those games?
Chris,
So hack and slash is kind of like what you were talking about. The younger group is more interested in combat. Whatever rules for combat are, that's what they're interested. They're interested in killing monsters, bigger monsters, more monsters, stuff like that. So that's what a hack and slash type of game is more combat focused, using whatever combat method that's in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And role playing is, a lot of times people will say like the theater of the mind. So you don't necessarily have figures or maps out, or placement of people. You just kind of are thinking it and describing it and saying what it is, and trying to more role play interactions between the NPCs and the players, and giving them options to solve puzzles or solve problems through discussion versus combat. At least that's to me.
Interacting with the world,
Yeah.
is really, again, with TechML, that's really what I do. Is they're really interacting with the world, and so they, my Sunday night group, they're all very shortly going to be a number of them are going to be getting married, because of course the clan in TechML, it's a very clan-based society, and the clan is mother, the clan is father, and the clan matriarch has said, well, it's time for all of you to do your clan duty and get married and have a couple kids for the clan.
Okay.
So we're going to go through that in a few weeks. But just interacting with they went back to 12,000 years in time and interacted with some things of the ancients, and you do all that, as Chris said, just conversationally. You don't need figures, you don't need to do combat. It's all okay. What do you do? How do you interact with this person, and so forth. When they went to the planetary governor's palace, it was interacting with the because there were no people there, of course, but there were the androids, and the undying androids, and so forth, that they were interacting with, and they are interacting with the surroundings. So that's what I'm talking about with, yes, role playing is interacting with the world, as opposed to going out and fighting ogres or whatever it is.
And then the second part of that question was, how do you approach storyline for that game? It's actually easier just to do hack and slash, because then you look up what level they are, or what monsters can these players defeat, or maybe not defeat, and just throw them at them. With hack and slash, they're not too concerned about plot. It's more the monsters and the XP that they're getting out of it. For role playing, it's a little more intensive. I once did a murder mystery type thing, and I basically had to write out this whole story of what happened and all of the different clues that were there and who they led to, and have them have situations where they can then speak to the different suspects and whatnot. And of course, they go off the rails and decide to do something completely different than what you've planned. And so you just kind of make it up as you go along. But as long as you have kind of the bones, the structure of the story there, you can roll with it. But role playing only type games tend to need more thought behind it, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and you need to prepare. I mean, fortunately, with my TechML group, I have a friend who kind of code. I actually run the games during the running of the games, but he and I talk every week, and he helps me with plots and putting things together and things like that. With my TechML group, it's pretty easy. When you've been playing TechML for 40 some odd years, including playing with the creator of TechML for a number of years and things like that, it just kind of gets ingrained into you. And so when you know a lot about the world, you can just kind of, create some situations and expositorily do it. D&D, while you can do role playing with D&D, it really doesn't lend itself as much to role playing. It really is more geared toward combat than role playing. That's not to say there aren't people out there doing very heavy role playing D&D groups, but it's really more geared toward getting down to the next encounter and fighting the next monster.
Yeah. We also have another question that's for someone who has never or rarely participated in an RPG but would like to. Is there a good resource to get started, or is it better to find an experienced player to guide you through early games?
I'm only laughing because I remember it was something when I first started saying, that I was going to be running for my nephew and god nephew and stuff like that, right? And my friend Chad Weber said, wouldn't it have been cool when we started playing, years ago, if we had somebody who had 40 years of experience to guide us through the game? We didn't have that option, but it does, it really, and answer to the question is yes. If you can find somebody with experience to be as a GM, it really does make a difference. It really does help. I don't know if there's any great
I mean, there's a lot of
resources.
online, now there's a lot of online ways that you can meet people or find online games, like the Facebook group for Minneapolis Gamers. People will post and be like, I'm looking for a game to play, or I'm looking for players. And I know that it is, I will say it tends to be easier to be a newer player that's coached or introduced into whatever gaming world through someone that's more experienced. But sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and you decide because you want to play that you'll run the game and then get a whole group of noobs, new people, new players, and just start and learn through experience. I know, people don't necessarily want to have to start because then, you make mistakes along the way and things like that happen, arguments, discussions, whatever. But if you can't find anyone, then you might have to just be the one to take that first step and learn how to do it. But there are a ton of online ways to meet RPG players for in-person games or online games or virtual games. So I would try and check those out too. Like I said, the Minneapolis MPLS gamers group, they also have a file of looking for group or looking for players that you can put your name in and what type of games that you want to play in. And also there's a list of people that want to run games, and what type of games. And then, like, if you contact the person that's like, I want to run a Star Trek game, you go and you contact them and say, hey, do you have an opening, or are you playing a Star Trek game? Would you be interested in starting one? Can I play? you know and that's just kind of how it starts.
And right now, of course, when we're all, a lot of us are virtual, but if and when we get back to conventions that are not virtual, going to a game convention and sitting and on role playing games is another good way to do it, because then you can talk to people and say, you might find out that there's somebody in your neighborhood or whatever that has a game and might be looking for players. So that's another way to do it. Yeah, or just word of mouth, friends of friends. I'm sure, Chris, I'm sure had that happen. So
Yep.
yeah, Facebook groups, as Chris said, are really good for that. And there are other Discord groups as well. If you don't know what Discord is a sort of
An
social.
online chat social platform
Yeah, but
with gaming.
it's specifically for gaming. It's specific because
Yeah.
it's got things like dice rollers and other things. So specifically for gaming groups. It was originally created, I think, for online, not role playing, video game groups. But there's a lot of board game and role playing game stuff in there too. So. One question it says would you say the hack and slash is better for beginners in some ways? I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
um I think that's the easiest to kind of comprehend, because most of the games that you run, their combat system is the rules are all laid out for that. All of the combat, wounds, healing, harm, that's all kind of um, built into, and you can quantify that. So I think that's easier for people to latch onto, because then you can just look at the math and know, yes, I hit that person. No, I didn't hit that person. Yes, I took damage, but I subtract my armor off of that, or whatever the system has, it's math based. So you can kind of see what's happening and what you're doing. So that tends to be easier for people. Um, and some people just aren't actors, or they don't much like role play. That's not something that they're interested in. They have a character, and they have what their character does in this alternate world, but it's not like they need, you know, they're not going to write a memoir from their perspective and have that all ready as backstory, you know, to play in this game that meets once a month or something,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, but it's always good to think of a personality, or come up with a voice for your character or an accent, so that when you do speak as them, you know what their voice is, or what you think they're going to do, or what their priorities are. um, but again, that comes with more playing. But there are still new people that are really great at role playing right off the bat, and that's what they're good at, and that's what they like. It's really just finding the things that you like and you like to do.
One of the things that Chris mentioned is the whole backstory thing. Especially for when you're starting a group. for new players, for a lot of new players, as Chris said, this, you know, there's certainly, this isn't true for everybody, but for a lot of new players, especially younger players, creating a backstory can be difficult. You know, because they just aren't used to doing that creative writing sort of thing. But you know, when started, this is many years ago now, when we started the 4th edition in my Wednesday group, which has been going for something like 15 years or something. But anyway, we all created, you know, pretty detailed backstories. My character had a backstory, you know, that was just a couple pages long, but it was pretty detailed, you know, and it came up again, you know, periodically as we went through, you know, the 10 years we played those characters. So if you can create a backstory, it can be helpful, especially for role playing. For hack and slash, it doesn't make that much difference, but for role playing, you know, it really can make a difference if you can do that. Another question, what's the most challenging game you've gone through as a DM, GM, or what are the lessons you learned from that experience? Well, here, let me give you, you know, a couple of, an interesting thing that happened. We, again, this is my Wednesday group. We were doing the 4th edition version of Tomb of Horrors. Now, the Tomb of Horrors is a module that came out in D&D. AD&D, I think, was the first one. It was, you know, written by Gary Gygax, and it was written specifically to kill his players. No, seriously, I'm not kidding.
Yeah,
he admitted it.
That's true. Yeah, no, it's deadly.
And it has been republished for every edition of D&D since then. So there was a 4th edition version of it, and it was this big, thick book. And you know, the way the book was laid out, the first section of it was for like characters 10 to 12, and then the second section was characters 14 to 16, and the third section was characters 18 to 20, and the last section was 24 and up. But in between, you know, 12 and 14, you know, the book just says, well, you have 2 choices. You can just level everybody up, or you could have somebody do something else, right?
Yep.
So my group decided that instead of just leveling people up, we were going to have different GMs create an adventure for somebody. So basically what happened is one of the players had a very interesting backstory. He was a dragonborn character, and he had a backstory that he was raised by tieflings, and they don't get along very well, and in 4th edition D&D, and so he had been worshiping the Raven Queen. He wanted to switch over to worshiping Bahamut, which is the good god of dragons. And so what happened was I volunteered to create a module, you know, create a, you know, an adventure for this character, specifically for this character. You know, I took an old D&D module and just kind of as a basis, but you know, it wasn't just because as an idea thing, and created a quest for him in order to change deities. This quest where Bahamut said he had to go out and kill this Draco Lich, right? You know, in order to. Okay, well, you know, so I had to go ahead and take out this cult that was creating, you know, half-breed dragons. You know, it was half dragon things, and then kill this Draco Lich, and I created this quest, and you know, and then I created, you know, monsters. There was like a half red dragon, half phase spider, and there was a half black dragon, half minotaur, and a half brown dragon, half Goliath, you know, and so forth, right? So I had to create these things, and so they go through this adventure, and which is a challenge to create because, again, this is, I had to create not just the adventure, but I also had to create the monsters as well, which it was fun, but it was kind of challenging. And that's what she was asking me about, how challenging it was. And one of the more interesting, one of the most challenging parts, though, was again, the first part of about 2/3 of the adventure was taking out the cult, and then the last part was they just had to go take out the Draco Lich. Well, they finished taking out the cult, and the last dragon hybrid was this shambling mound / electrum dragon, which was an electrical. They do electricity damage. And the character who I had created the adventure for, there was another character who was in the group that was a Goliath character that happened to be pregnant at the time. And the character I created the adventure for was a ranger in this hybrid dragon, the last one that they were fighting before the big, before having to go down to the next level and deal with the Draco Lich and stuff. They were fighting this thing, and in order to save the pregnant character, the character who I created the adventure for dove in front of this lightning bolt, and I one-shotted him. Now this is the character who I created the adventure for, right? I one-shot. I got a critical. Got a critical hit, and I one-shotted him. And it was toward the end, and I just said, "Okay, we're done for the night, everyone. Let's meet again next week." Because I didn't know what to do, right? I had to figure out, okay, because this is his adventure, So I thought about it over the week, and at the next week, at the beginning of the game, I took this character aside. They said, "Well, you're dead, and you find yourself there, and there's the Raven Queen, and there's Bahamut, and they're having a little conversation. And the Raven Queen turns to Bahamut and says, 'Well, if you want him, you got him, but you're going to owe me.' And Bahamut says, 'Okay.' And so basically Bahamut resurrected him. And then, he sat out that game session. And toward the end of that game session, the other players found his character. They opened a sarcophagus, and there he was. And instead of having black dreadlocks, which is what, the dragon would have these dreadlocks, his dreadlocks are now silver because he'd become part of Bahamut, worship of Bahamut. So, and of course, then of course later when we were finishing the Tomb of Horrors, the whole thing about the Raven Queen's, she called her marker, let's just say at the end of our games, but that was a real challenge. What do you do when this whole thing that you've developed you spent hours and hours and hours and hours, and you one-shot the character that it was developed for? It was just like, I just didn't know what to do.
Yeah. That's a super good example I think as a GM or a game runner, the most challenging thing to do is to try to predict what your players are going to do, which never ever happens correctly. So a lot of times it's just rolling with the punches, making either, if you have to, make stuff up as you go along. A lot of improv lessons probably translate very well to game running lessons. You don't necessarily want to say no, you can't do that. You can say yes, and this happens, or yes, but then this will happen. And it eventually you learn that the rules are there as a structure and as bones to the animal, but you're really fleshing out everything else. So it's really more about the enjoyment of the players versus, sometimes you as the creator will have to step back and be like, well, this isn't what I planned, but if they're having fun with it, then let's go with it. Um, I can't really think of anything specifically other than like making stuff up on the fly that's been really challenging. But I have been in games where you could tell that the dungeon master or the game master was frustrated, and you kind of have to be like, okay, let's take a different path to this. Um, in one game, I played a 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons game with my friends, and we actually took turns being the dungeon master, but it was a friend's turn, and because this is a game and has rules, they can be broken or they can be exploited. And so the one of the characters was min maxed to the point of having an armor class so high that no other character, no bad guys, no monsters could hit this character unless he made a specific bad guy to take on this one character, and the rest of us were just ignored basically, and we had our own monsters or challenges or whatever. And I think that's one of the things that I had to learn, is that sometimes you have to address individual players individually with individual challenges just for them, because they happen to find this feat or this, skill or talent that they have, and it just kind of, it doesn't break the game, but it would hamper the gameplay for the rest. So then you have to kind of either, you can fudge some rolls and be like, oh, I rolled that, and nope, I missed. I didn't hit you with this, you know, Draco Lich, but I did hit you with your super high armor class. There we go. You know, and that's why we have a dungeon master screen, is so we can roll behind it and be like, you're good, you're good, you're good, you failed. Now you take some damage. And it's okay to bend the truth or make the storyline better for the group. I think that's probably the best lessons that I've learned.
We got a comment question. There were a large number of gaming systems back in the 80s. There seem to be fewer choices these days. Do you think that's a good thing? Was the experimentation then resolved by converging games into D20 systems? I disagree with that first comment, and Chris, I think you will too. There are a lot of gaming systems these days. They don't have the popularity. I mean, D&D is, the 10,000-pound gorilla, obviously, right?
Yep.
But there are a lot of other sort of popular game systems as well, and there's a lot of new game systems that come out. I mean, Chris, you were running Monsters of the Week, for example. I mean, that's a nice
Yep.
little,
So
a friendly little game system. That.
yeah, that's powered by the Apocalypse system, I believe,
Uh,
which is super rising in popularity.
and that's a D6 system. It's
Yep.
not even a D20 system.
Yep. I think there, I mean, yes, it seemed like there were more um gaming systems back in the day. I mean, I still to this day, Greg loves the I forget what it's called, but it's the Marvel system where they had a graph, and you knew based on the graph whether or not things hit or miss, or they're protected or not protected, or their speed or whatever. Um, and there are just some systems that work better for other games than they do for, than a D20 system. I think it all depends on what you're looking for and um, what kind of, you know, games that you want to play. I think you can, if you do a little research, you can find basically any fantasy, any sci-fi, any noir, any pulp, any horror in almost any of the different systems, whether it be D20,
And current.
D6.
I mean,
Yeah.
not just stuff from the '80s. I mean, current new systems coming out all the time.
Yep.
You know, I
Yep.
mean, I look at Kickstarter. You know, and there's new things come out in Kickstarter. I played a Shadowrun campaign for quite a long time, and that's you roll many six-sided dice in Shadowrun. It's the way it works. For example, so yes, a lot of them did. You know, you don't see so many percentile dice games anymore that you used to. Um, and there are fewer. Most of the games, yes, are D20 based. You know, that is true. But there are a lot of you mentioned Greg, his Glitter Hearts. I mean, that's a he published that. That just came out. Monster Hearts. That's again. So there are a lot of smaller games out there still being published that are new. So I wouldn't say that they're there weren't the popularity. I many many years in the '80s, I had a friend who ran a Iron Crown Rollmaster game. That was a very tedious game if you've ever played it. Um, I played a magic type, and interestingly, it was the fighters that we had combats that would last 8 hours. A single combat that would last 8 hours in that campaign. It was ridiculous. So,
Yeah.
are there any TV or movie trope situations or scenes that you like to borrow from for your stories, or specific combat situations?
Yes. Um, I tend to think of all of my role-playing games as television shows, and every game is basically an episode. To me, that just makes sense growing up with TV and stuff. And Monster of the Week actually cites, different television shows like Buffy, Supernatural, X-Files, and they're basically like, take whatever you want from any of those shows that you like and incorporate that into your game. You don't, it doesn't have to be exactly that same, universe or named the exact same things, but you can still take whatever tropes that you want. Um, I think also for D&D, when I try and write arcs or plots for different characters, I also think of them in, either a movie aspect or a television season aspect. And that to me just helps me organize my thoughts better, and then have notes for things that I want to happen or want for those characters, um, for their story. Also, you can certainly talk to any of your player characters and be like, what things that do you want? You said that, you grew up without your father. Did you want to meet your father? Is that something that you're interested in, or no? Or take bits from their backstory and bring it, to the forefront for them within the game. And they'll be like, oh yeah, that's right, that's part of my backstory, I like that. um I can't think of anything, but I even at one point I even used a video game. I used World of Warcraft, and I brought up the manager, and I did exactly the scene of going to this harbor, and was like, this is exactly what you see, because not everyone had played World of Warcraft or knew, the Stormwind gates and the harbor there. And I was like, so I'll show you. This is exactly what I logged in and I showed them. So I've stolen directly from World of Warcraft for my game before. Um, but I think, especially with when you're playing with people you know and friends that you know and you know what type of media they've consumed, it's easy to be like, hey, remember this scene in this movie? Yeah, it's like that, but everything's on fire, or whatever you want to do with that scene.
Mhm. I when I was running Chill, which is a horror role playing game, um, then yes, I did think about um, those sorts of situations. And with Chill, the interesting thing about Chill, the way at least the second edition worked was that the monsters are all basically much more powerful than you are. You can't kill them, but they all have certain weaknesses. So when you're running and playing Chill, the whole point of the game is to do a whole bunch of research first. You have to role play the research to figure out here are the weaknesses of the monsters. Because if you go in and try to kill the monsters too soon, you will die. That's it. You're done. So you have to do the research. You have to do the role playing. You have to figure out how to kill the monsters before you can go in and do that. And so yeah, that's one thing about that. And then in that case, you do take a lot of horror tropes from movies and things like that, right? I have a little sign that I put on the front of my GM screen that I love. It says, "If they didn't go into the house, there wouldn't be a movie."
Mm-hmm. Yep. Um,
you know.
yeah, no, that's 100% true. I just remembered. I also ran a game of 10 candles once. If you want to talk about really interesting game mechanics, um, so basically, for 10 candles, you light 10 candles, and when something bad happens, you blow out one of the candles until there are no candles. It's a game built, and you tell everyone that all of your characters will die. It's the game is built to build suspense and horror and atmosphere, and you're supposed to play in the dark with only these 10 candles lit. And uh when bad things happen, that person then has to blow out a candle, or if they fail their roll or whatnot, you blow out a candle. And you go in knowing that everyone in the game is going to die. It's just what happens. But it's like building that story on the way there. um and yeah, so that's an interesting mechanic, that you just have candles, 10 candles, and once they're not lit anymore, the game is done.
I think the horror role playing lends itself a lot more to the story, than some of the tropes than other genres of role playing. Just because it just that's Chris, I have a question for you.
Sure.
In all your GMing years, did you ever have a TPK? For those who don't know, TPK, total party kill.
Total party kill. um if I did, I fudged the rolls. um Nothing comes directly to mind that I was like, ooh, I really heavily bombarded them with damage. I mean, I've done that on purpose before, where I knew that they would then be, captured and taken, or, they were poisoned and knocked out and then, taken. Um, but there have, I don't think I've done a whole party. I have killed multiple players, But most of those games have a mechanic where you're just unconscious, you're not
Right.
dead type thing. Um, I have in games on the first game been killed, outright killed in the very first game I've ever played, and I was the cleric, and it was like technically per the rules, I was like dead, 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 not unconscious.
Mhm.
And the GM was just like, no, you're just unconscious. We're not going to do that. That's stupid. This is the first game. Maybe it was the second game, but it was like, no, we're just undoing that.
uh,
Which is, you know, totally,
that's why you
totally
have a
cool.
GM, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
What about you? Have you ever done a total party kill?
Well, yes and no. Um, this is back in the days of original D&D, back when it was just the three little pamphlets. Remember that? And it was just like,
Hmm.
here's some sort of a shell, and you go out and make your own rules, right, and everything. And I had created this huge mega dungeon, and I had a whole bunch of characters, and there were like 12 players, at the time. It was crazy. Anyway, and part of the thing in my dungeon was that I had teleporters, right? Would teleport you to a different part of the dungeon, right? And you walk
Hmm.
down in the teleporter, and people didn't like that because then they didn't know where they were because it was a mega dungeon, right? They didn't know where they were.
Hmm.
So this party had three dwarves in it, and it had a couple magic users, and um, uh, they were walking down, and there was a dead end, and it was just a dead end. It wasn't anything special, just a dead end. And they thought it was some sort of teleporter, and so sometimes you have to close the door to get the teleporter to work, and so they were, anyway. Long story short, the party self-destructed. Um,
Oh no.
yeah, I didn't do anything, really, seriously. I sat back with my eyes just like bugging out because the party just killed each other. They literally they killed each other. The majors were throwing spells at the dwarves because they were talking in dwarvish. And anyway, there were one person that survived was the cleric who had a ring of teleportation, teleported back to the surface of the dungeon. And the other one was one dwarf survived, but he was still in the dungeon alone, and so didn't make it out. I mean, it was just like I didn't even make a single roll, not a single roll, and they just self-destructed. So it was, yeah, but it wasn't exactly me doing it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's always interesting when interpersonal, or well, not personal, but like interplayer combat happens, unscripted. I mean, I've played games where you're like, okay, you're in a gladiatory arena, and you're pitted against one of your other players. Roll to see who does better than the other or whatever. Um, but never like, you stole my girl, I'm gonna gut you, kind of, you know,
Yeah.
thing like that. Uh, we did get another question. D&D
Yep.
editions ranking 1 through 5, worst to best.
Okay, I'll give you my 2 cents worth. I've never played second edition. I didn't play third edition. I did play 3.5 a little bit. Of course, I played first edition for years. Or actually, I shouldn't say that. I played 0th edition, I guess you would really call it, the original D&D for years. And then I played AD&D as well, which is, I guess, the first, what you call the first edition. My favorite is still 4th edition. I like the 4th edition. When they came out with 4th edition, it was a reaction to what happened with 3.5. Basically, 3.5, they kept publishing more and more books. Chris can try to tell you. I have friends who have libraries of books.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where, people were constantly min-maxing their characters, and they had these prestige classes. And as Chris said, they got these characters that were basically invulnerable, that you couldn't, they couldn't touch. And that was, what people wanted to do. And so they, Wizards of the Coast came out with fourth edition, which was very much more sort of video gamey, miniatures based, very combat based, but also extremely, 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 extremely well balanced. Everybody
Yes.
was balanced across the board.
Yep.
The problem with fourth edition got to be, and it was great, when you were levels 1 to 8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. When it got to higher levels, it got cumbersome because of the powers that you had. Everyone had different powers. Combat could take a long time. And so it kind of overbalanced at the top end a little bit. But it's still my favorite one because I like the way they balanced it really well. Fifth edition then was a reaction to that, saying we're gonna make everything but simple. They watered it down so that everything was really, really a lot simpler. And don't get me wrong, I like fifth edition. I'm enjoying playing it, but it is very different than fourth edition was. But I never cared for 3.5 very much. How about you, Chris?
I never played the original D&D. I only played a little bit. Actually, that's how I got introduced to role playing to begin with, was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons,
AD&D, okay, yeah.
AD&D. And I absolutely hate THACO, so that will probably be my worst. I probably have played 3.5 the most, or 3 and 3.5 the most. So that I'm the most comfortable with. However, fourth, so I'm gonna say fourth edition was my second to least favorite. Then I really like, but I still really liked fourth edition. If you've ever played a video game, you can slide right into fourth edition and completely understand what's happening. You have your dailies, you have your encounter spells, and you have or actions, and you have your at wills. So it's basically like you have the powers that you can do every time. You have the ones that you can do once per encounter, and then you can have one that you do once per day. And as a video game player and it being super balanced, there are a ton of classes that were each unique, um, but still similar enough that you understood what was happening with them. And again, the beginning levels were great to play through. It was really only when you got to higher levels that it sort of showed the seams a little bit. So I still like fourth edition, and actually that's what I recommend if people have never played D&D before, is to start with fourth edition because it's the easiest to learn, get into, and comprehend, especially if you've played video games before. I think 3.5 will be my second favorite, mostly because of nostalgia, and that's what I played the most. That's what I have the most experience with. But I will say that fifth is probably my favorite because it's a watered down, streamlined third 3.5 edition. It takes all of the good things that 3.5 had and then just kind of simplified it and streamlined it so you don't have to worry super much about the math. You have advantage if you're prepared for this, or you have disadvantage because you're not prepared for it. And it just kind of has the flavor of 3.5, but just streamlined and easier. And I
We
like
have
it a
about we
lot.
have about a minute left. And one thing I will say about fifth edition, that again, I'm enjoying fifth edition. If you're going to play fifth edition, be very careful because it is a killer at first and second level. So your GM has to be very careful about it. It is really, really hard at first and second level. When you get up to third level, you're fine. But the first and second level, your GM has to be very careful in fifth edition.
Yes.
Any final comments, Chris, before we sign off here?
Nope. I think I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks,
The
everyone.
other thing I'm going to say, one other thing, is we didn't talk about the social contract. You mentioned it a little bit, and that is, whatever your group is, whatever you're going to do, you kind of have to, understand who your group is and come with, how you want to play, what you want to do, and keep it simple. I mean, my Tech Email group, we're all adults. And Tech Email is a very interesting world, but it's also got some very adult themed things, a lot of sexuality, slavery, human sacrifice. Not really a world for 12-year-olds. But anyway, yes. Anyway, thank you all for attending our panel. And there are additional panels and continuing on after our dinner break. And hope you enjoying things so far. And thank you.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.